As robots and machines steal jobs, we look at the future of work. Joining us on Columbus on the Record this week, Peter Ward, Operations Management Professor at Ohio State University. Lauren Stone, Vice President of Robotics Education at the Tesla Foundation. And Stephanie Wilk, Management and Human Resources Professor at Ohio State University. Welcome to this Columbus on the Record special. This week we take a step back and look at an issue that affects politics and policies and, frankly, how we're going to make a living in the years to come. A lot has changed in the days since the Industrial Revolution. Companies are turning to robots, automation, artificial intelligence to produce products and services. Humans many times are too expensive and unnecessary. Industry observers say we're on the cusp of a fourth industrial revolution. Many fear we're heading towards a future where jobs no longer exist. Peter Ward, that's a drastic fear. How did we get to where we are today? What's the evolution of this?
Well, you know, we've mechanization and taking the human element out of work has been, been evolving for many, many years. Really, automation, which involves a programmable element or an intelligence, started in the 1960s, and we've had tremendous growth over the ensuing decades in terms of what machines can do. And we think about I have Alexa in my kitchen, and Alexa does all kinds of things for me.
This is the voice activated.
The voice, exactly, the Amazon device that can play the radio for you and tell you who won the 1966 World Series and things like that. But there's all kinds of applications in work that involve, first automation of factory work, and eventually automation in offices, and then more and more service work. Has been automated in one way or another. Mm-hmm. So it's been one industry after another, with more and more fraction of automated jobs.
I don't know who can answer this, but is it fair to say this is our fourth industrial revolution? I mean, if you think about it, we've been using technology since the first guy figured out that a rock that was round could be used as a wheel to move something down the hill. Is it more of an evolution of technology, and it's just that this is just a continuation of the process?
You know, it's interesting when you think back to a period in the early 1900s, right? So when you had electrification merging with flight, mechanical, and everything, and how transformative that was. That's what this is. It's so transformative to what that compared even more so, because now you have the intelligence where it's thinking for itself, potentially answering back to you. Yeah. So yes, I would say yes, we are evolving to that.
So it's more than just a series of revolutions. It's just an evolution, continuing process.
Yes.
Is it faster now? Is it what's the difference? Is it the speed, the changes coming at us?
It can be speed, but it's also the type of work that's being automated as well. When we think about the thinking that some of these computers can do, it's not just the person on the line that was tightening a bolt that we now can get a machine or a robot to do that. That early was in factories, in 25, 30 years ago, I was working on automating factories. That was my job, and part of it was teaching people then how to not deal with the machine but deal with the computer screen. Right. Now what they're doing is a different kind of work. It's not just those easy mechanical pieces, it's really thinking about what needs to be done next, and that part of it is where I think it starts to step on even more kind of human toes.
Mm-hmm. What drives it? Is it always money, Peter, that drives this? That it's always looking for increased efficiencies, lower cost to produce higher profits? Yeah,
well, it's money, it's quality. There are a lot of there are a lot of drivers, but essentially we're economic people, and so largely it comes down to saving labor and thus saving costs. There are times when it's also about making jobs safer, which is another application, and also quality. There are times when we can just do a better job with using automation. A great example of that is when we think about surgical robots.
Yep.
Where certainly very, very costly, but nonetheless worth it in terms of the potential for greater accuracy.
The argument, go ahead.
The research on services would also say that we as consumers are actually wanting it, because we want that standardization. We want it to be the same regardless of who's on the other side, or we want to be involved in the process and we want to co-produce, because we don't want to wait for somebody else to look for our bank balance. If we can do it ourselves, we'd rather do it ourselves, because we can control that and then control the time that we spend on it.
And we want low-cost goods. And that goes to both automation and offshoring of products. I mean, we want to buy our TV or our car for as low as price as possible, and automation helps with that.
And I think that's what's overlooked a lot. There's always this fear that automation is, that's the topic today, taking away jobs. But if anything, it frees up the potential for new jobs, but also reduces costs, which makes the lifestyle increase potentially, the consumer goods increase, which drives commerce, which drives development and innovation.
Do we really replace the jobs that have been lost on the factory floor with other jobs? What is the math? What does the research show on that? That's what economists say, that you put robots on the factory floor, that leads to other jobs to create the robots or to do other things.
It's true, and you can look at that throughout history. There's always been an improvement in technology, the weaving industry, with what happened there and how much it was changed in a sense of labor. Labor was reduced, I think, 98%. But then it created more jobs in managing that. The banking industry, what it did with ATMs, just even thinking in automation in that aspect, 43% increase in banks after a result of that, despite the fact that teller jobs went down. So where it's manufacturing or jobs, yes, there's a reduction, but then usually other jobs will blossom out of that and managing that.
Yeah, I think the challenge is that there are the jobs that are being replaced are not necessarily available to the people who've been displaced.
Yeah.
And that's really the difficulty. And I think from a policy perspective, we have to think about how do we get people trained in ways that will allow them to to continue to work and to continue to be productive.
Is that anything new to our generation? I mean, when the textile mills are in the Northeast and they moved down south for a while, then they went offshore and automation reduced jobs even more. Those folks faced the same thing, 150 years ago.
Sure. I think the difference is that if in a mechanical age, if you were able to work around machines and you could be successful, you could find other jobs hard because whole industries left. But what we're talking about today is replacing people who are not necessarily literate with respect to digital technology, and then it's much harder for them to find that equal job in a age when digital becomes very, very important.
And we hear of college campuses, for example, starting to require students in their first year to take a coding class, because we're starting to realize we don't have the pipeline of people, because we don't want you tightening the bolt. We actually need you running the system that will tighten the bolt and being able to troubleshoot that. And so we need coders. We need people that are thinking about the technology and the AI types of work, because absolutely.
Yeah. And all this talk about the digital natives and the great advantage that kids have. I think the issue is that they're familiar with digital technology, but actually doing work with digital technology is quite different. So that notion of coding and teaching young people to code and really encouraging that, I think is terribly important, and we often lose that.
Okay. It wasn't long ago when robots were considered science fiction. Today they not only are real, but they're getting better and faster at doing jobs once done by men and women. Look around, you'll find robots in hotels and hospitals, fast food chains, installing self-service kiosks all over the place. Companies are testing out drone delivery, and driverless cars are, of course, right around the corner. Lauren Stone, which industry are robotics, for instance, right now? In which industry are robotics have the largest presence? Is it manufacturing still? It has been for 20 years.
Yeah, I couldn't quote exactly the statistic. I will say I don't know that, but manufacturing, the logistics industry, the impact of that. But the speed at which this is happening is speeding up this across all industry.
What is the potential of robots? I saw a video of a robot security guard. We see NFL training camps with robotic tackling dummies. I mean,
And in hospitals, whether it's in the back end in terms of logistics or literally doing your surgery for you. So they're doing lots of very important jobs.
Yeah, the medical industry alone, I mean, it's a repeated task and diagnostic task. It's all about data. So ultimately, if you get an analyzation of data and the medical
Correct.
aspect of that, you can, in reality, get a much better result than the human in that, but then you're integrating the human within that process and creating that cyber-physical interaction.
for those of us who haven't been in an operating room, or at least conscious in one for a while, I mean, how is the robot working in surgery? It's somebody's operating it, correct?
Sure, the surgeon is operating in it. The surgeons are surgeons who are capable of working with robots and been trained in it, and you know, are in great demand. But so it's a highly skilled surgeon, and a robot that is able to move with greater precision than humans typically can, and that's the trick there.
Columbus is home because of its location and transportation infrastructure, logistics and warehousing. What's going to be the impact of, and they're very automated now, but only going to get more so. What's the impact of robotics and automation in that industry here?
Oh, enormous, enormous. You know, it is every year there's, you know, one way to talk about it, I think a positive way to talk about it is the productivity of each worker just increases each year in those industries in particular. You know, services have lagged behind. And I think that, you know, we talk about this new industrial age, I think the real impact on that is that we're now seeing services absorbing the same sorts of change that we previously saw in manufacturing, and if you go back and think even in agriculture before that, there's a certainly decades-long trend of more and more automation, and it's now hitting in places that it didn't hit before.
And when you think about, for example, in the logistics side, grocery stores, and when they went into barcoding of products so they could track, et cetera, but now we're moving into self-service kiosks in which, you know, we as consumers are checking ourselves out, weighing our own fruits and vegetables, and the technology is there to be able to read and understand things. And those are even getting better over the course of the last couple of years, and in just my own experience in using them, and they'll get better still, in which we're automating, you know, taking some industry and pushing that boundary further and further.
I mean, self-service gas stations. I mean,
Absolutely.
Was that
I mean, they
1964, I think, was that first?
I mean, they started with you had to have a person in the booth, and you had to give them $20 to fill up, or at the time probably $5 to fill up your car. And now you don't even need that person. You do it at the credit card, and you don't even have to say hello. In fact, some of us, like myself, don't want to see that person. I don't want to stand in line behind the cigarette purchasers and the lottery ticket buyers.
But interesting with that example, to the point of the discussion, more jobs were created despite the technology. So as the cost went down in the fueling stations, then you had these mini markets pop up. It was a shift in the development of that service level. And so then other things were born from that. We have no way of predicting out of AI and what's going to happen, what these unknown jobs are going to be. And that's what, to me, it's an exciting opportunity right now. We have to embrace it.
But you went from the the guy who pumped your gas, then that person went to the mini mart. Well, now that mini mart's been replaced by a kiosk, self-serve. So what's left after that? I guess that's the fear that people have.
Of course, yeah. And understandably. And you know, I think just from my perspective personally, you have to embrace change. I know that's scary, but as we've counted through history, is we keep improving our work-life balance. We have to upskill. Of course, there is going to be a growing pain right now. There is going to be a transition because of the speed with which things are taking place.
How about things that you think about, you know, self-serve kiosks at the grocery stores or at the gas station, automation in the factory floor, even at the warehouse floor. But what about artificial intelligence and the legal field? How is happening there with sort of how are robots and artificial intelligence devices affecting those professions which you wouldn't think of?
Well, this is where you go back to data. And what they do is they're looking for patterns. We have artificial intelligence that can read emotions of people, that can look at all kinds of data points and understand a pattern, picking juries, for example, looking at facial recognition of mood and reaction to various questions. It can scour through tons of legal history to be able to pull out themes or ideas or things. I mean, it just, to me, that kind of technology augments the knowledge that the individuals will have, but then that's where the human AI interface is really required. We need to figure out how to use it in its most effective way to be able to really leverage it.
Yeah, and increasingly the move is from artificial intelligence being able to do the routine and recognize patterns and look at lots of data very, very quickly, to more and more nuanced, to where the less routine work can now be taken on by the machine, which implies fewer and fewer people in those jobs, and I think that's the risk and the fear.
All right. Researchers at Oxford University estimate that 47% of U.S. jobs could be automated, as we've been talking about, within the next 2 decades. The skills that were once in demand are now obsolete, and that means pursuing different kinds of education, investing in job training and retraining programs, and picking up skills that can compete with machines will become even more necessary. Stephanie Wilk, how do you, if you're a factory worker and you need to find a new job, what choices do you have? What do you have to do?
You're going to have to retrain in some of these new technologies. And there's lots of work training programs, whether it's at universities or other kinds of organizations that support. Even unions are out there retraining workers to be able to take on these new jobs and to have those skill sets around coding or managing, and even shifting from maybe maintaining certain kinds of machinery to maintaining different, this new machinery that's now going to be running the floors. So I think that there's opportunities for us as an educational institution to also tap into that, and seeing this kind of focus on teaching and getting a pipeline of people out there is also really important. So it's not only the retraining, but also making sure we have a pipeline of people to be on the cutting edge.
Realistically, if you have just a high school diploma, you've been working on the factory floor for 20 years, how realistic is it for that person to pick up a new skill quickly enough to get another job? And while he or she is competing with somebody who is 25 years old coming out of college.
That's a hard one.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that part of it is that you have to have a willingness and you have to be able, right? Those are the two pieces. And for some, they may feel like they aren't able, but I also think that there's a group of people out there who feel unwilling. They don't think they're quite, they don't know that what they're capable of doing because they haven't tried it before. I think that there are some people that are going to have to really rethink what they do. But I also think that there's opportunities for some of these folks to be trained. And we hear these stories in the educational world all the time of the person that was, working as a cashier and eventually lost their job, but came back and started to think about a new business idea or something else, and they retrain themselves in other ways. So I think that there is a pool. I mean, my dad was one of those people. He worked in a factory floor for 35 years. He's now 88. And when you tell that story, I think this is, what would my dad have done? And there are things I think he could have done, but you have to look for where those opportunities are. But I'm not going to lie and say that I think these folks could be retrained to be AI, specialists.
Is the private sector doing enough with retraining, or are they relying too much on, say, Columbus State Community College or Ohio State or other education institutions to do that retraining for them?
Yeah, this is, being an entrepreneur, these are exciting times. There's never been more energy flowing from an entrepreneurial landscape and public and private partnerships. Now, we have a long way to go, but when you look at Columbus and just what's happening with Smart City, you have Idea Foundry, we're involved with Autonomy Hub. So you have a lot of these organizations that are developing programs that really are taking away those barriers. So yes, it is a partnership. I don't think anyone's doing enough, but together we need to do more.
How has job training changed in the private sector? I mean, IBM and GE used to have extensive employee training programs. Are they still around, or they farmed that out to colleges and universities?
Some companies are really doubling down and spending money on retraining, and some just don't have the resources in the pockets to do it. And plus, they're also looking at the automation that they've invested in and saying, we're trying to get those efficiencies. Do we now have to turn around and spend all this money on training and development? And the trick for organizations is it's a long-term investment. To reinvest in workers requires you to think about your workplace in 2 years' time or 5 years' time, not tomorrow. And that is a hard, in today's times, it's sometimes hard
to predict
it's hard to predict what you're going to need, and it's also hard to make that investment and make an argument to your shareholders that this is a good investment when you're not going to see return on it for a while.
That's an incredible point. I think that's where corporations have to step up and get more involved, because that's what it's going to take. It takes that partnership, prototyping, creating programs where people can get involved at all levels.
All right, a final topic. Advances in technology have ushered in a new wave of automation as machines match or outperform the humans. Still, the world won't be run by robots. It won't happen overnight. Peter Ward, how long is it, where's the tipping point? Is there a tipping point? I mean, at some point, if every warehouse, factory, hospital is more and more automated?
Yeah, I think that we're approaching a tipping point as we've really seen a speeding up of the adoption of automated technologies, and I think that it takes a while for that to sort of play itself out in the labor market. But I think we're getting to that point, and there is going to be a shakeout. I mean, I think when we think about young people, well, we really want to do is educate them in ways that are going to allow them to be flexible and to change over time. Where my heart goes out is to the 50-year-old who has had a productive career, but did not have the education needed to go and adapt, and that's a much harder trick. And I think we have to work on how to educate those people and allow them to have the full career.
Is the social compact that companies have now the same as it was decades ago? I read about how Kodak delayed an implementation of a film developing system to protect a certain group of workers who are nearing retirement so they wouldn't lose their jobs. I just can't see that happening today with the pressure on companies, public companies especially, to meet Wall Street expectations and to lower cost. And is that still out there?
I think that's changed dramatically. I mean, I think that we went from kind of that old deal where the company was in charge of your career to kind of a new deal in which the individual is starting to be in control, which means that the company can kind of say, you're on your own to learn new skills, et cetera. I think we've gotten to the point, particularly for certain skill sets, in which we're shifting to kind of what I'm going to call the New Deal. Peter Capelli's also talked about this. And one of the things that has been really interesting about that is that we're starting to see for certain skill sets this desire on the company's part to get involved because they want to retain that person and retain that intellectual capital, that it will be useful for them, particularly as they're going forward. So I think everyone now has a different contract in the organization, and I think that's what's tricky about it.
You're an entrepreneur. Are there enough vacancies in the entrepreneurial world to pick up some of this slack?
Sky's the limit. I mean, to me, it's a lab environment right now because you're at the front of the frontier. I always give the example in explaining it to people. Imagine the Wild West when you were walking down the dust-covered streets and the horses everywhere, and there came that steam Model T or the steam locomotive, how foreign that had to have seemed, but the amount of enterprise that developed from there. Where it's something to me that's exponentially. You just have to step off and get involved and learn and just take a chance.
Any jobs that are completely safe from this trend? Plumber, I think about a plumber. I mean, or
the arts.
A teacher.
The arts. There's a huge opportunity here because when you're talking STEAM, the arts area, because of typically in history, when things improved, people had more time. So then the arts actually flourished from movies and whatnot. So this is an opportunity for the arts where probably it has not been given enough attention over the years for it to really flourish. So I do think that you don't have to be tech oriented. You're going to see a merge of these two.
All right. Good news for the artists, okay?
Absolutely.
We end each show with a final, what we call off the record parting shot, a final thought on this topic of the future of work and how we're all going to make a living in 20 years. Peter Ward, we'll start with you.
Yeah, my advice would be that kids who are in school should learn basic coding, learn math, and learn to communicate. And that will give them the flexibility to move forward in their careers no matter what happens.
Lauren.
You know, I wasn't a lover of math when I was younger, but you got to get involved in the STEM side of things, the science, the technology, engineering, math, and of course the arts. And then from an entrepreneurial standpoint, just dive in. It doesn't matter if you are one that thinks that you can create a job or create a company, just get involved. There's so many resources wherever you are, especially here in Columbus.
Okay. And Stephanie.
I'm going to switch gears and talk about the consumer side of things, particularly with services. Now that we're doing more automation, we have to see ourselves as co-producers, that we are working with the person at the checkout. We are working with the person on the phones that we're talking to in the call centers, which is an area I study. We have to think of ourselves as co-producers of our services.
All right. I predict that journalists will never be automated, because who else are politicians going to blame when things go wrong? You got to have someone to shoot. Yep. We'll always be the messenger. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. We urge you to check us out online, Facebook and Twitter, and you can see each episode on demand at our website, wosu.org. For our panel here and for our crew, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.